It's probably one of the worst periods to be a woman that there has ever been.
Women were expected not to have professions. They were not expected to be well educated. The few that were the exception, not the rule.
Even though it was so culturally accepted, women must have felt slighted.
It isn't a question of life or death anymore, where I think then it really was.
If you're a woman living in the 16th century, it depends entirely on what class you're born in. If you're born into the peasantry, then you have no rights whatsoever.
But they had an important role to play in that the household was a workshop, and they were needed.
It may well be that if your husband doesn't have an ox to pull the plough, he will use you to pull the plough, and that will be part of your work, just as having his babies, you know, looking after the animals, housework, cooking, cleaning will be part of your work. You are fundamentally a beast of burden.
You have to imagine at that point that even though it was the most usual way to be treated, that there was a feeling of being trapped, of being used, of being pawned, of being unappreciated.
Very definitely you still had the hierarchy of the husband or father being the head of the household. Now, it's possible that the woman ran the household. However, she would still have to kowtow to the fact that the male was foremost.
It's small comfort, but your husband as a Tudor peasant doesn't have a great life either, but it's worse to be a woman. So at the bottom of the scale, it's a life of extraordinary hardship and poverty.
You're educated. It's a chance I never had. Observe the ladies of the court, see how they achieve what they want from their men, not by stamping their little feet, but by allowing the men to believe that they indeed are in charge.
It's about survival, because you can't go out to work. It was rare for women to be able to express themselves intellectually.
What would you know of great men?
The ability to recognize his match in others and not be threatened by it.
His match in other men?
Women too.
You believe that? That women can be the match of men?
At the very top of society, when you're a young woman, you're in the possession of your father, who will decide where you live. From a very little age, you will be sent away to live with either relations or friends of the family or people with whom your family has connections, and they will bring you up and train you. You might get educated, you might be educated quite well. Some young women have quite educated-minded parents, and they get taught to read and write, and perhaps foreign languages. They might be taught Latin even, music, dancing. Then your parents will arrange a marriage for you with a man who might be old enough to be your grandfather or might be young enough to be your son. It just depends what suits them and what suits the contractual arrangements they want to make.
It wasn't about love. The fact that marriage is about love is a very modern invention.
So how was it, the wedding night?
It was very satisfactory.
It was about uniting families, about giving families more power by being joined.
The marriage is the way that you enforce a contract. So you say, okay, we've got a piece of land over here. We really want to join it to our neighbour's piece of land there. We'll marry our children together, and that joins the land together. It then becomes one piece.
There is a strain on the king's marriage. In such circumstances, a man sometimes seeks comfort elsewhere.
And women were used as pawns in that.
Have me bed him instead.
No, that's not...
Yes. Exactly.
And their beauty and charm and wit was all just a way for the family to get higher status for themselves.
Go to bed, get a good night's rest. Tomorrow there's the hunt. You must excel at that. Everything depends upon it.
If you're lucky, if you're phenomenally lucky, your husband will die and you will end in possession of the family that you've had with him, and therefore you'll get to live in the house. And you might marry again, and you might marry an older husband, and he might die. And bit by bit you might accrue power and wealth, though each time you marry, it will become your husband's. So you really have to marry husbands who die. The only The only safe position, the only position in which you can own your own money is as a wealthy widow. So that would be your ambition.
Mary, you've obviously made a deep impression on the king. He's requested that you come to court with immediate effect.
The king has secured for you a position in the Queen's household.
In any household, you desperately wanted to get into court. You thought that was the place to progress. We have a lot of documentation about what happened in court scenes. We don't necessarily have so much documentation or manuscripts as to what happened in day-to-day life, but the court is well documented.
Women had domestic roles at court. They were in the Queen's household primarily.
In which case your work is to accompany her, to hand her gloves, to help her at dressing.
The ladies certainly needed help with their dressing because after all we didn't have zippers, we didn't have hooks and eyes, press studs, a lot of lacing, a lot of fur for warmth, a lot of rich heavy fabrics. We didn't have man-made fabrics. It would take several hours to get dressed. They were very careful with their clothes. One of the reasons they didn't pick up their dresses with both hands and grip onto them was after all they'd use those very hands to eat with. So to push a dress aside would be more normal than to grip and pick up. Once you were married, it was not normal to show your hair. It tended to be covered with your headwear. When you held a hat, when you took it off your head, you never showed the lining because you might not have had the cleanest of hair. It might have been infested with living creatures such as lice, etc. And it also might have been very greasy because they didn't have dry cleaning fluids or situations as we know today. So when you took your hat off, you would hold the inner lining against your thigh, or against the side of your leg or the body. So you didn't carry the hat to show the inner lining.
People did not take baths. They washed their faces and hands with cold water. But they were afraid that warm water would open the pores because the fear was that while the warm water might help a particular ache, that the pores of the body would somehow absorb some evil thing in the atmosphere and they would become sick, that the warm water would make them ill.
In those days, they honoured always the people they were speaking to, or when they entered a room, particularly in the court. Certainly you never approached the king until he approached you. You never came to court till you were invited to court. If you were of a family already at court, you had to be presented and it had to be asked, could you be invited to court?
May I present my daughter, Anne?
A daughter? No one said anything of a daughter. Had we known, we might have come sooner.
We also had a situation called proper and improper. That doesn't mean correct and incorrect. It just means it would be more normal to start dances proper. So the lady would be to the right of the gentleman. During dances, frequently you would end up being improper and change sides and maybe revert to being proper again during the dance. And this would also be normal when you were escorting somebody, that you'd escort your lady proper. She would be on the right-hand side of the gentleman. All these different things come to etiquette, the way you behaved, the way you spoke, the way you responded to another person, where you stood in society, your ranking, whether you were higher or lower. All these form part of the etiquette.
You witch.
No, my lord.
You cursed, evil witch.
What have I done? My lord? I beg you, spare my sister.
When people are romantic about the Tudor period because it looks so beautiful, what one has to remember is absolutely underpinned by the exploitation of women. They're not women who are immoral, they're women who have been exploited by the men around them. And I think we should really be conscious of the fact that when we're looking at Tudor women's choices, you're almost always looking at women who are forced to do things by their families, by their husbands, or by the men who control them.